Welcome to True Tears Stories. Please like this video and subscribe to True Tears Stories. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. He stayed behind the wheel a little longer than he needed to. The sun had already started its descent, spilling gold across the sidewalk, the kind of light that made everything look softer, more forgiving. The bouquet of tulips sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in pale brown paper, damp at the stems. David had chosen them carefully. Yellow for warmth, white for peace. A small gesture, maybe. But after the week they'd had, it felt like the right bridge to build. The argument had started over something small. A forgotten text, a delayed dinner, but it had unspooled into something messier, older. Threads pulled from months of silence, miscommunication. The quiet disappointments neither of them had voiced until it was too late. Still, when he left that morning, her voice had softened. "I just need a little space," she'd said. He had nodded, kissed her temple, and promised not to push. David reached for the flowers, straightened his shirt in the mirror, and got out. The building was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every step echo a little louder. He didn't bother texting her. He wanted the gesture to feel spontaneous, honest. He still believed that mattered. The door wasn't locked. That was the first sign. He stepped inside, calling her name gently. No answer. The living room looked untouched. A sweater draped on the back of the chair, her coffee mug beside a half-finished book. The hallway was dim, the bedroom door barely ajar. He pushed it open. There are moments in life that arrive in slow motion, not because the body slows, but because the brain can't accept what it sees quickly enough. David stood at the threshold, the flowers still in his hand, their damp stems beginning to tremble. She was there. And so was someone else. A man, shirtless, familiar, in a way that made David's stomach turn. The ex. The one she said she hadn't spoken to in years. They didn't see him at first. The sound of the door, or the shuffle of his shoes. None of it cut through the cocoon of the moment they were in. It was her laugh that did it. Soft, tired, real. A sound David hadn't heard from her in weeks. Then she looked up. Her mouth opened. Her body jerked like someone had pulled a wire. She sat up, pulling the sheets with her. The man beside her turned too, blinking like he couldn't quite place David in the room. David didn't say a word. He simply placed the flowers on the dresser. Not thrown, not dropped. Just set them down like they belonged there. She stammered his name. He didn't wait to hear the rest. He walked out, down the hallway, through the door that should have been locked, out into the gold-drenched evening that somehow kept shining, oblivious to the wreckage behind him. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the car, not with rage, with clarity. There was no confrontation, no slammed doors, no screaming, just an ending that wrote itself in the simplest of ways. He put the key in the ignition. Then he took it back out. David didn't drive home. He drove away. The motel room was small and smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarette smoke. Nate sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the bouquet of flowers still in his hand, petals crushed from his grip. He hadn't let go of them since he left the house. His car keys were in his pocket, his phone in the glove compartment of the car, turned off. For now, He didn't want the outside world to reach him. He hadn't spoken, not a word, not even to himself. His thoughts came in flashes. Her voice, soft and amused, the shape of her back under the sheet, the way her hand rested on another man's chest like it had never left it. Familiarity, intimacy, comfort, and all of it without him. The motel's television glowed dimly in the background, playing some rerun comedy show with canned laughter that grated on his nerves. Nate didn't watch it. He just stared at the wall, letting the low, distant sound be something he didn't have to answer to. Eventually, his body reminded him he existed. His stomach growled. His neck ached from the tension. So he stood, walked to the small bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, red-eyed and hollow. The man looking back seemed older, like he'd lived a year in an hour. He left the flowers in the sink. That night, he didn't sleep much. Morning came gray and sluggish, casting long shadows through the heavy motel curtains. He stepped outside for air, not really sure what he was looking for. A sign, maybe, a reason. Some validation that he wasn't overreacting, that what he saw was as final and unforgivable as it felt. But all he found was silence, and a faint breeze that smelled like spring. He drove without knowing where he was going. Towns blurred past, the day passing in increments marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. He ate gas station snacks. He used rest stop bathrooms. He avoided mirrors. 3 days later, he checked into another motel, this one further out, tucked behind a forgotten stretch of road where even the vending machine outside had sun-faded labels. He bought a notebook at a nearby pharmacy, a cheap spiral-bound one with a red cover. And that night, for the first time, he wrote. He didn't write about her, not directly. He wrote about himself, about the boy who grew up believing love was built from patience, about the man who always filled in the gaps so no one would feel the weight of what was missing. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the page was wet with more than just ink. Days passed, then a week. He got used to the quiet, not comfortable with it, but used to it. And slowly, he began to think again. Not just react, not just hurt, but think. Had she loved him? Maybe once. But something had eroded between them, worn away slowly, like a shoreline losing ground to tide. He wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. Not to the house. Not to the town. Not to her. But he wasn't ready to vanish completely either. He bought a disposable phone, sent one message, not to her, but to his brother, just to say he was safe, that he needed time, nothing more. No one needed to know what he had seen. Not yet. The story wasn't ready to be told. The train ride back from the city was mostly silent, except for the occasional murmur of conversation and the rhythmic clatter of metal on rails. Grant sat near the window, jacket folded neatly on his lap, watching the blur of lights slide past the glass. It was odd, he thought, how something could fall apart so completely, so suddenly, without warning, and yet, in retrospect, all the signs had always been there. His phone buzzed twice. He didn't look at it. The screen had already filled with notifications, missed calls, unread texts, voicemails, all from Olivia. The scent of crushed roses still clung faintly to his sleeve. He hadn't said a word when he left, hadn't yelled, hadn't demanded answers. He had simply looked at her, at the stunned guilt blooming across her face as she clutched the bedsheet like it could shield her from the truth, and then turned away. Her ex, Marcus, broad-shouldered, arrogant Marcus, had pulled on his shirt and muttered some hollow version of, "This isn't what it looks like." But Grant had already stopped listening. It was exactly what it looked like. The apartment he returned to felt colder, though nothing had changed. The keys still hung by the door. The book he'd been reading was still open on the coffee table, and the groceries from the morning still sat untouched on the kitchen counter. He stared at them for a long time before slowly putting them away, one item at a time, as if doing something normal might steady him. But nothing felt normal. Sleep didn't come that night. He lay on the couch, fully clothed, watching shadows shift on the ceiling, trying not to picture her body tangled with someone else's, the way she used to wrap herself around him, when they still touched without distance. By sunrise, something in him had hardened. He turned off his phone. He didn't go to work. Instead, he packed a single duffel bag, just clothes, a few books, his passport. He emptied the trash, watered the plant by the window, and wrote one short note that read only, "Don't try to find me." Then he left. No grand exits, no confrontation, just absence, quiet and clean. Grant had always been the dependable one, the stable one, the one who apologized first, who made dinner when she was tired, who took her car in for service without being asked. But stability, he realized, was not the same as value. Not to her. Not anymore. In the following weeks, he drifted. He took buses without destinations, stayed in modest hotels, ate alone in roadside diners. He told people his name was Jack, or Daniel, sometimes just G. It wasn't that he was trying to erase himself. It was that he didn't want to be recognized by the shape of a man who had let himself be humiliated in his own home. Once, at a bookstore in a quiet town near the coast, an older woman behind the register asked if he was okay. "You look like someone who just got unmade," she said, not unkindly. Grant gave a tired smile. Maybe I was. He bought a used copy of a travel journal. Not to write in, just to carry. Weeks bled into months. The pain didn't fade exactly, but it dulled, like a wound scabbing over. He stopped thinking about what Olivia was doing. Stopped checking her social media, which he'd kept open in moments of weakness. Stopped wondering if she regretted it. She probably did. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, he wasn't being measured against someone else's dissatisfaction. He was alone, yes, but not invisible. Not mocked. Not made to feel less than. One evening, in a small mountain town, he met a man named Peter, who ran a woodworking studio. They got to talking. Peter offered him a part-time job, help with sanding and deliveries. Grant said yes. Not because he needed the money, but because it felt good to build something with his hands, something tangible. He never told Peter his real story, just that he'd needed to get away. Peter nodded like he understood more than he let on. "You'd be surprised how many people end up here for the same reason," he said one morning over coffee. "Heartbreak is the best marketing we've got." Grant laughed, for the first time in weeks. He stayed. The studio smelled like cedar and oil, and by the second month, Grant's hands had begun to forget the softness of his old life. They roughened with calluses, steady with repetition. He found comfort in the routine, measuring, sanding, shaping something raw into something useful. The hiss of sandpaper, the thunk of wood being set in place, became the rhythm that carried him through. No one asked where he'd come from anymore. He'd become part of the town in the quietest way, just another man with a calm face and a steady walk. Someone who kept to himself, but nodded when passing others on the street. That suited him. He didn't need new stories. He just needed distance from the old one. Then, in early spring, a letter arrived. No return address. Just his name, scrawled in familiar handwriting. He didn't open it right away. It sat untouched for 2 days on the corner of his work table. Every time he passed it, something in him flinched, not because he didn't know what it was, but because he did. He could already imagine the contents. Regret cloaked in softness, apologies offered like crumbs, maybe even an invitation to talk someday. On the third night, with the rain tapping soft against the windows, he unfolded the envelope. There were only 3 lines. "I shouldn't have said it was a mistake. You didn't deserve that. I hope you're okay." No signature. He read it once, then again, and then he put it back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer. There was no rage left, no desire for revenge or closure, just silence. A stillness that had once felt like emptiness, now felt like space. Space to breathe, to exist outside of what she had once defined him as. That weekend, Peter asked if he'd help with a custom piece, a bench for the park by the lake. Grant said yes. They worked in tandem for hours, barely speaking, just letting the sounds of their tools and the open air do the talking. When they finished, Grant ran his hand along the smooth edge of the bench and felt something surprising. Pride. Not just in the bench, but in himself. For not breaking. For not unraveling when it would have been easier to disappear completely. He had vanished, yes, but not to escape, to rebuild. One morning, he walked to the market and passed a young couple holding hands, laughing, pushing a stroller. He smiled, not bitterly, not wistfully, just a real, simple smile. Love wasn't the enemy. What had hurt him was not love, but its betrayal. And he knew now that betrayal said more about the betrayer than the betrayed. Later that night, he stood outside under a sky streaked with stars, the kind you couldn't see back in the city. He thought about the flowers, the soft white wrapping, the note he never got to give her. Then he thought about the woman who had chosen someone else, and the man who had walked away. And he knew which of those men he'd rather be. Emotional wind down. Grant didn't need the last word. He didn't need the letter to mean more than it did. It came too late, and yet, strangely, right on time. Not to change anything, but to affirm what he already knew. Some people apologize because they've changed. Others apologize because the silence starts to echo. He didn't need to know which one she was. He only needed to keep living. There was still warmth in his life, just in different places now. In the neighbors who nodded at him on their porches. In the wood shavings curled like ribbons across his floor. In the way the lake reflected the morning sky like glass. Sometimes he still saw her in his dreams. Not with bitterness, just as someone he used to know. A chapter that ended mid-sentence. But every story has one of those, doesn't it? Something left unresolved, unexplained. The important part was that he was writing again, and now he wrote with intention. On the edge of the lake, the new bench stood firm beneath the spring sun. People would sit there without knowing who made it or why. But Grant knew. He knew it was built with steadier hands. Hands that once held something broken and chose, finally, to let it go. He sat there one morning, coffee in hand, the envelope tucked in his coat pocket, not as a weight, but as a reminder. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout or break or chase. Sometimes, it's to leave, to vanish just long enough, to find yourself again. And when you return, not to them, but to yourself, what you build next is yours alone.